I'm turning each of these holes in my kitchen into a room in a mini magical tower. Today I'm making this hidden garden full of little plants and supplies. It wasn't easy, but it was a lot of fun, so you sit back, I'll do all the hard work, and let's hang out for a bit. The last one of these I made was a cozy library, and I used cardboard for the walls, but it warped pretty badly, so this time I'm using foam. I want the walls to look like brick, but this is how big a brick is at this scale, and I've got to cover both of these, which is a whole lot of bricks. Since I'm using foam, I can just carve the brick pattern in directly instead. It's definitely a lot faster than cutting and gluing a billion individual bricks, but it's still not fast. I checked the clock after the first panel and it took 2 hours, and I still had a whole nother panel to go. Thankfully, the floor was nice and straightforward. But you might be wondering, why is this garden inside a room? What's going on? Like I said at the start, this room is going to be the second of many in what will become a magical tower, home to a witch and a wizard. This tower is in the desolate lands of Kitchen, so there's not a lot of good soil outside. Instead, they've converted a room at the top of the tower into a garden to grow the plants they need for their magical potions. I say magical potions, but if you were to observe the witch and wizard for any length of time, you'd see that they mostly use the plants for making tea and hearty stews. Anyway, the walls and floor fit like a glove. We'll come back to them a bit later because they ended up being a bit of a headache, but for now, let's turn our attention to making some plants. Well, actually first, the plants need somewhere to live, and it turns out if you cut a super glue lid in half, you get 2 perfectly formed mini plant pots. Despite seeing other people do it heaps of times, I've never actually made mini plants, so I looked up some tutorials and came across a really great channel called Queen City Minis that is an absolute treasure trove of mini making goodness. They've got some excellent tutorials specifically on making plants as well, so I'll leave some links in the description for you. I ended up making over 7 different types of plants, which I'll show you in a moment, but with this first one done, let's see about those walls. Off camera, I made this little test piece and I really love how it came out. All I have to do is replicate it on these big panels. The first step was really easy, and that was just to add a nice bit of color. I watered the paint down quite a bit so it could get into all the little gaps between the bricks, and then went over it with a second, thicker coat to get a bit more saturation. The next step wasn't quite so straightforward, but while I wait for the paint to dry, let's make another type of plant. I wasn't trying to replicate any plants in particular, instead I was just using the techniques I'd learned from Queen City Minis to come up with things that looked and felt right to me. One thing that didn't look quite right was the matte finish of the paper, so I coated the leaves in super glue to give them a bit of a shine, which I think worked really well. With the paint on the walls now dry, I moved on to making the mortar. A lot of people use actual grouting for this. I didn't want to buy a whole tub of this stuff only to use a few spoonfuls, so instead I'm using baking soda. I could have sieved it, but I went for the mashing approach instead because it's just way more fun and tactile. I added some glue and a splash of water. What are the ratios? Absolutely no idea. I just winged it. Wang it? Wang it? Well, let me know. Then it's just about getting this goop into all the little cracks and crevices, and that's why I watered it down, to try and get it to sink in a bit better, but this is where the problem started. You can see the excess I'm wiping off looks a bit coloured, and that would be the paint starting to lift. I wasn't too bothered about that because I was going for a distressed look anyway, but what did worry me was that as it was drying, all of these little bubbles decided to show up, which didn't happen at all with the test piece. It took 4 hours to carve all these bricks, so I really didn't want to start again, but I'd just have to see if I could salvage it after setting it aside to dry. While they were drying, I settled in for a bit more planting. I think of all the plants I made, this one is my favourite, but I would be curious to know which one you like the most. And speaking of liking, if you're enjoying the video, it would be great if you could give it a like too. Thanks! The first batch of plants was looking good, but I couldn't ignore the walls behind them, which had just finished drying, and they didn't look good. The bubbles were so obvious and completely broke the illusion of these being tiny bricks, but with nothing left to lose, I mixed up a thicker batch of goop, this time without any water, and tried to fill the bubble holes. I was trying to be all delicate and use a skewer to put it on, but sometimes you just got to get in there with your hands, you know? And then, once more, it was a waiting game to see if this was all for nothing. To distract myself, I moved on to making some other teeny tiny things you'd find in a garden room, like this itty bitty watering can. I wanted to have something a bit bigger than just potted plants in the room, so I did something I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and that's to make a mini tree. After twisting some wires together to form the branches, I coated it in some Mod Podge to lock it in place and make it more paintable. Setting that aside to dry, I could take another look at the bricks, and finally they were looking exactly how I wanted. It seemed like the thicker mix of goop did the trick, but having the walls done did reveal a new problem. The scale of the floor felt really off. I wanted it to seem like they were big planks, but they were just cartoonishly huge. Thankfully though, redoing the floor was so much faster than redoing the bricks would have been, so I'll count myself lucky that it all worked out in the end. For the leaves of the mini tree, people usually use flocking, but you can make your own by pecking at a sponge and soaking those little bits in paint. I made 2 colours just for a bit of variety. I realised that I'd also need a back wall, which somehow I'd completely overlooked until now. Since this is a garden room, I put a nice big window in it for some much needed light for the plants. I was pretty confident with the mortar now, so I made up some more goop and then set it aside to dry. I sometimes get a bit in my head about trying to do things in the most efficient order possible, which means I end up stalling because I don't know what my next move should be. I really tried this time to just do something rather than be thinking about doing something. Even though I'm jumping all over the place, it's nice to actually get stuck into the project. I learnt my lesson from last time that I really need to glue everything down, otherwise I'll just knock it all over. A little bit of dexterity really wouldn't go astray here. I don't know why with my sausage fingers I've been drawn to making things on such a small scale, but here we are. After a lot of toiling and bumbling around, there's a real satisfaction to sliding this magical little garden room into the rack. I hope it brings the resident witch and wizard as much joy as it brings me when I catch a glimpse of it in the kitchen. Because it's so long and skinny, you're really rewarded for slowing down and having a proper look, which in today's fast-paced world is extremely refreshing. It also makes it really hard to film. For the moment, I've just sticky taped some fairy lights to the roof, but eventually I'm planning on making a proper lighting system for the entire tower. If you've got any suggestions for how I can do that, or any ideas for future rooms, do let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and of course a special thank you to all the members who are supporting the channel. I appreciate you all so much. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you again soon.